Hello everybody, my name is Jose Merchan. Thank you for joining us on our fifth free webinar. I'm joined by Gustavo Merchan, our Managing Director here at Blazedpath. He will be chiming in whenever to help me explain the features for today.
Gustavo, yes, hi. Welcome everybody to our fifth webinar. Today, Jose will cover two important topics. One is regarding, it's more for administrating purposes when working with Blazedpath, how you administer your branches and versions, GIT repositories. And on the second half of the webinar, he'll be covering Bpm Engine. That's how to model business processes within Blazedpath natively. And yeah, so one more functional and one more administrative, development oriented. So let's go ahead.
Thank you, Gustavo. So on our previous webinars, we've covered a lot of features, how to create screens, how to navigate through screens, how to pass information from one screen to another, so you can actually start developing processes. We covered on our last webinar the stepper, which is a widget to create static and dynamic processes, but they were all very UI oriented. So today we are going to go into the Bpm engines, which are processes that are modeled on the backend, and of course they have their own persistence states, and they are very, very useful. Gustavo is going to give a further explanation with the example when we get to that. But before that, we are going to go on how to use the Git, because until now we've been showing how to create workspaces, empty workspaces, standalone workspaces from existing. We touched on how and why the Git works inside Blazedpath. Today we're going to show you how to actually start cloning directly from scratch, and how to push and pull all your changes. So let me quickly go over and jump into the presentation. So there we go. So whenever you open Blazedpath, or maybe when you already opened Blazedpath on your own workspaces, you will see the launcher. This is the very first thing you have in Blazedpath, which you have the workspace from scratch. This is standalone. This is an existing workspace that is also standalone, and you usually have the chance or the option to clone from an existing Git repository, so you can directly start collaborating. If you click in here, which is what we are going to do today, you can add the URL for the Git repo. We use the HTTP version, not the SSH one on this version. We also have we need to set up a folder on our file system to save all the files on the Git repo. So let me create a new folder for this webinar 05. Click on OK, and you do have the option to set up your username and password at this step. If your Git repo, like this one, doesn't require your credentials to clone it, you don't really have to do it right now. But whenever you start to need to push your changes, maybe create branches and push the branches onto the actual Git on the repository, you will need to set up the credentials. But for this example, let's say you forgot or you didn't want to do it at first, so I'm just going to click on OK. And this is basically going to execute the Git clone and get all the data from the repo to your local file system. So this Git repo, it's down in the description if you want to try it with ours. It's in a tiny URL down in the description. There's nothing much in this repo yet. We are going to create our examples for today from scratch. So as you can see, there's only web application. The web application on this example doesn't have nothing yet. It's just an empty screen. So we are going to make a couple of changes so you can see how the changes can be seen on our Git UI on the user interface in the Git section. So as you can see in here, we have a lot of information. You can see the local changes. You have another tab for the log history that shows you all the changes that have been happening on this branch. So you can see in the local changes that right now, since this is a fresh clone, there's of course no changes. But let's say we actually start creating changes. So let me add. I'm going to do two changes. I'm just going to add a new component, and then I'm going to change something in this component, so you can see how to spot the differences on our Git repo. So as for this difference, I'm just going to change the text for this label with changes. So you can see that we are going to see this section changed on the Git UI, and then I'm going to add a file, UI component. UI component example, and I'm going to add something inside the canvas so we don't get an error of not having anything in here. Just going to throw a label in there. There you go. And if we go over to the Git section, you can see the two differences. As for this UI component example, since this is a new file, everything is going to be seen in green, which means added. This is a common notation. If we go to the home component, we can see the differences, the line that's no longer there, and the line that has the changes, with the changes highlighted.
I want to just comment there that the way Blazedpath works, of course, you work configuring your project against a local repository of, I think those are JSON configuration files for your project. And the way Git works is, of course, just for the audience that may not be too familiar with that, it is comparing versions of your local version with the version of the same branch that is currently published in your Git repository. That's why you connect with it, and when you attempt to synchronize, you can track those changes, both the ones that you have received from updates in the Git repository that someone else did, right? Or you can compare the changes that you have made that you may want to push into the Git repository for others to see those changes as well in the same branch. I think that's rather obvious, but we may have some more novice audience that
don't really know how it works.
Let's move on.
So if you wish to start pushing these changes, let's say these changes are good enough for whatever you wanted to accomplish. So you would have to stage these changes. This is like normal Git workflow. So you have to stage the files, then push them onto the repo. So to do that, we are going to have proper credentials, since this is even though it's a public Git repository, to push onto the repo, you have to have credentials. So let's say you forgot or you didn't have credentials at the time, you would have to click on your username, and you can just add your user and password in here. So let's say JL merchant, Blazedpath, and my password. And if you click on stage, you have to add the message for your commits. This is like a proper remarks. Let's say webinar example for Git. You click on push, click on commit. And this is going to push the changes onto the Git repo. You will not be able to do this if you don't add the username and password. We just wanted to show you where the credentials are added if you forgot to do it before. So then you can go to the Git repo and you can see, let me show you. So this is the Git repo, and if I reload this page, you will see the changes in here that were done 30 seconds ago. So basically, of course, you can do this with an external tool because this basically works over your file system. So you can do with any other tool you may be familiar with, but you of course have the option to do it in Blazedpath. You can also do proper branch management from here. You can just go, the branches are located on the down left, on the down right of the screen over here. So you can just start creating branches, merge other branches onto your current branch. Just remember to have a proper Git workflow practices, so you don't have merging problems when you do merge a branch onto the other. As for the log and history, this will show all the logs for the changes of the branch you are currently in. So let's say you want to see this difference on this commit from Blazedpath Studio commit. You can click on all the files that were made on this commit, and you can see the difference that was uploaded on that particular commit on that particular file. I think that pretty much covers how to use and push your changes onto any Git repo. So we are just going to go over to our other example, which is the Bpm Engine. And maybe Gustavo.
Just wait. Let's see if we have any question about this. Just give the audience a second to see if there is any question about it. So before we move to the second topic,
I don't see any question on the chat. Let's answer the questions when we are done with the onto the Q&A section. So we can. Well, we're just going to get the questions jotted, and we're going to answer them at the end. So let me go over to the Bbm Engine example. So maybe Gustavo, you want to help us explain the details on.
Sure. BPM stands for, of course, Business Process Management, and the idea is how you can configure a flow of activities, considering conditions and considering events that may alter the flow of those activities. And instead of course, programming that logic, that business logic, you can draw it as an actual flow of activities which are represented in boxes. And you have the circles that represent events. Those events could be beginning events or termination or end events, but you can have intermediate events that either interrupt or do not interrupt the execution of an activity, but also they can be placed on their own as a node, as part of a flow of activities. So events like wait for something to happen, wait to receive a message, or actually trigger an event, right? Launch an event that communicates or gives an indication to another section of the process to continue, or to send a message, or to run a very standardized execution, right? But the idea is that within the activities, you can create the logic of what should happen inside of each of those activities. So here in Blazedpath, you can model the process, and also within the activity, you can run executions to call, for example, microservices, right? And perform whatever, read, write, update, or process, make a calculation. There is a model attached consisting of variables that you can carry along the instance of the execution of the process, and those variables can compute and transform and process your business logic, basically. It's a rather more visual way to express business logic than coding or writing. It's very useful for business analysts to understand how a company should perform a specific operation. And yeah, so this is a complementing tool to help developers write less code, and it's adequate, like I said, for either business processes, or it's also very useful when you need to execute a transaction that comprises more than one microservice. So whenever you need to assure transactability, so make sure if a message is posted to one microservice, make sure that the other one also gets posted. So that consistency and transactability guarantee you can have it being executed by a Bpm engine. Also, I forgot to mention the little squares or rhombus, right? Diamond shapes. Yeah, those are gateways. So those can condition the flow, and you can have splits. So execute both outgoing arrows to execute after the instance has entered, or you can have either of those or a combination of them. So yeah, so refer to the documentation of each of the nodes. This is a very simple example. You can have sub-process, so you can have an activity really become a sub-process that you can express as a separate diagram and reuse that separate diagram to be called from multiple other processes. And yeah, you refer to the documentation to see more examples and how each of those shapes behave. We follow quite thoroughly, although not entirely, BPMN notation, so business process management notation, that's standard notation. And yeah, so you can refer to that section on the documentation. And what else? So here we design in dev time, right? So then we compile, and then Blazedpath takes care of the code generation and expresses that logic in native Node.js. But yeah, let's move on.
Yeah. So just so you know, this example that it's already bundled in Blazedpath. You can open it through the Blazedpath Essential section on the workspace, and you can see the examples here, BPMN processes hands-on, which is the same that we have in the documentation. Let me pull it down. So if you go to the documentation and you go to building BPM processes and you go to hands-on, this is the same example. So if you want to have a very thorough explanation on how and why this example is made the way it is, and how to use it, because we go into details on each part that touches this example. You can go here and you can check every step of the way how and why we build it, so you can have a very deep understanding of how it works. So just so you know, the example is on the suite, and you can follow along the construction of the example in the documentation, so you can have so you can train yourself to master this very useful tool. Is very used in the industries.
Yeah, so to express business logic, like I said, and also for microservice orchestration or service orchestration. Whenever you need to make sure that a business process calls a microservice execution in a specific way, you can specify those executions within the boxes, so within the activities. So yeah.
There we go. So let me go through a quick example of how to build it from scratch, so you can see it's very easy to do. I am going to create from the architecture diagram, I am going to create a business process engine. I'm going to show you how to connect it to a persistent database with a MongoDB, and then I'm going to show you how a typical process is built with an example and how you can see the output of this of the microservice. So I'm going to create the microservice that is going to launch the process engine, and it's going to be called microservice. And then I am going to add a process engine, and this process engine will have a MongoDB database that will serve as a persistence. MongoDB. And now we have to connect the different arrows that serves as the dependency of each of these systems in the diagram. So The microservice is going to be making calls to the process engine. Then the process engine will be storing on the Mongo database. And just so the process engine knows that this is not a direct console, because the process engine, through the block key and the executions, you can do pretty much anything. You can make calls to other microservices, direct inserts in databases. You can also do direct inserts in these non-relational databases. So to tell the process engine that this database is going to serve as the persistent, we have to click on the little arrow that connects the process engine to the MongoDB, right click, and click Set as Process Persistence. So if we go back to our environment configuration, we can see all the different systems in here, and we have a flag on our process engine, because in Blazedpath we can do everything in memory without thinking about having to connect all your systems to different environments. You can just do your development locally in memory, so they are very so you don't encounter any roadblocks because you maybe don't know yet, or don't know how to, or you don't have the credentials to connect to a particular environment. This particular flag serves to let the process engine know that it's going to be running with a mock database in memory. So if you wanted to connect to the MongoDB, you just have to click on Activate, and then it will be connecting to the MongoDB. So I'm going to add the data connection for the MongoDB. This is a Mongo database that I have. Let me pull it down on the cloud of MongoDB. We are just going to be using this empty database, and I'm going to copy the information on the URL and the information of the database. Click on OK, and that will basically just start directly saving the information for the persistence of each process instance in the database. Let's do a couple of examples first, just in memory. So you can see the different outputs that we have with memory and directly connected to the environment. So I'm going to create a process in this process engine. I'm going to then create calls from this microservice and start the process and see the output. So going to the Explorer, to the process engine, right click, new process. And I'm going to call this one-step process. So again, like in most things in Blazedpath, we have this big designer view. We have the design tab and we have the logic tab. The design tab is where we are going to start designing the process with the visual part of the process. And then for each of the nodes that we want to set up the particular custom behavior, we are going to do so in the logic tab. So first thing first, I'm going to add a start node just to tell the process that this is the start point. I'm going to click on the widget, and you can start adding the remarks, so you can see visually on the design canvas what this particular element is. So this is the start node. And then I'm going to add an end node. Just look it up. Add the remark. And then I am going to add an activity in the middle that will serve as the console log output, so we can see actually something that comes out of the process engine. This particular activity is just going to let us know that the process was activated, and that we can actually just start typing the custom behavior of a particular activity. So let's add the activity. The activity is going to be connected through the start, and then the activity is going to connect to the end. We can go to the logic tab, look for the activity, and start. This is the activity number 1. This name activity number 1 comes from the node itself. This is the ID. So if you want to just directly double click on the activity, it will take you directly to the behavior of this activity, and we have to do two things here. The first, we are going to create a console log, and on this console log we are going to add a message that we are going to see on the console. So this is my message for the activity 1, and then I am going to return an object that lets the activity know that it has to move forward. The reason for that is that you may not want the activity to move forward. You may want to wait for a particular message to be received, or you want to get some kind of a trigger. So you may or may not want this activity to continue. You may want it to wait. So in this case, we are going to return the instruction that lets the engine know that it has to move forward. So how it looks like that, it's an object with a property that says move forward equals true. And if I go to, so that's the whole process that we're going to do right now, the one-step process. We do have to go to the microservice right now and create a launch for this process. So we're going to do that on the start of the microservice. So we're going to edit the onStart event of the microservice, and we are also going to be doing a console log on the web service, on the microservice, sorry. And this is going to execute an expression, which is going to be process start. These functions are found on the Blazedpath documentation. And whenever you open the parentheses, you can create some learn more, which is going to take you to the Blazedpath cloud, and you can see further explanation of these particular functions with the attributes and the return values. So the first thing I have to do is add the process I want to launch, which is the one-step process, and I can start with any starting model that I want to. This process doesn't have any starting model. This particular object works very much like the example we did on our previous seminar, which is basically referring to any and all the information that can be found on the local model of any process or any screen. So if I add any data to the starting model, I'm going to be able to use it here on the model and use the same block keys I've been using with the read model and the write model block keys. So let's just go over to the console so you can see it, the outputs, and I'm going to change over to assumed so you can actually see the output better. If I click on run, it's going to first start the building process, and it starts the process engine, it starts the webinar, the web application that I had from before, and then I am going to see the webinar. This is the webinar number 05 is the name of the solution, and the process engine says that on this process we have the console log for the process we just created. And the 0 in here refers to the ID of that particular instance. Since if you connect to a MongoDB for persistence, it's going to be a very big identifier, which we are going to see right now. Let me switch back, and I'm going to run this same example with the actual connection to the Mongo database, so you can see the difference. Click on run, switch back to the assumed. There you go. And we are going to have the same behavior, but we are, instead of getting the 0, we are going to get the unique identifier, which is a very big alphanumerical number that actually signifies that particular instance of the process. If we go back to our Mongo database, we are going to see this same instance. Give it a minute, and then I'm going to pull down the MongoDB web page so you can see the actual instance reflected onto the, there you go. So you can see the microservice return value is just this very big alphanumerical number. That's the message from the console of the process engine. And if I pull down the database, you can see in here the different values that we have for these instances. So these are, of course, we also have previous values from other tests, but basically this connects directly to the MongoDB, and then using this ID you can just get this process instance and just start sending triggers, sending messages, so you can carry on the execution of your process without having to worry about forgetting or not continuing the process. So we are going to create another example, which is going to be a bit more complex, just to showcase how to actually send a message using this same ID. So this is going to be a two-step process. We are going to add the start node. We're going to add the end node. And we are going to add two activities. This is the activity number 1, activity number 2, and in the middle, I am going to catch a message. So what I want to do is use this function to define a console log, just to let us know that it came here, and then we can move forward. Then the process is going to wait for a particular message that we have to define with a key, and then we can add also a value. And then we are going to go over the activity number 2. That's it. We are also going to just use a console log, so you can see that it actually gets here. So connect the different nodes, the start to the activity 1, the activity number, the activity 1 to the node that waits for the value, for the message, to this process. Then this node is going to connect to activity 2, and then it's going to finish. As for this this particular node, we are going to use a message key that just says student, because let's imagine that you want to add an inscription like we did on the previous webinar, and you want to start sending the different information for this process, so that then the process has to validate if maybe the student is qualified to inscribe in a different course. Maybe you want to check for any and all conditions, so you can just do any kind of logic you want to. But in this case, we are going to send a student as the message key, and then we are going to go over to the activities. We are going to add the console logs, add the log. This is the first of the 2 activities, and then add the return value, which is going to be the object move forward equals true, and do the same process to the activity number 2, add the return value and the console log, and then customize the blockies. There we go. This is the second of the 2 activities. And on the return value, at the same object, move forward equals true. And then on the catch message, we are just going to make sure that in here, let's say you send the message, you're going to receive the message on this object called message data. So then potentially you can add the message data, validate that it's correct, and then write the information on maybe the model. So either way, we are just going to create the launcher for this process. We are going to launch this process locally because it's faster. Click on OK. make sure that the flag is no longer active. And again, on the start, instead of calling my process one-step process, we are going to call the two-step process. Then we are going to tell this to wait for a couple of seconds, let's say 10 seconds, so that we can explain what's going on in the console. And then we are going to add a second console log that we are going to send the actual message to the process engine. So process engine, send message to the two-step process. We do have to add the instance ID, which we are going to actually save it from the process start. We are going to add the message key, which is going to be student. This is the one we defined on the actual design. And the message data, we are just going to send an empty string of information. This 0, we are actually going to capture it from the first call of the process start. So basically what I'm going to do here is to create a variable to store the ID, which I'm going to call my process instance ID. And I'm going to set on this new string variable the result of the process start for this two-step process. I'm going to delete the other blocky and I'm going to launch the application. And I forgot something. Right. So I have to convert this to string. Since this is a console log, I have to remember to always convert to string whatever you want to see on the conversion string. Which wasn't the thing. Type mismatch, expecting string, saved integer. Oh, right. So this instance ID is actually the variable that I capture on the first step, which is actually going to be the variable my process instance ID. That's my bad. And go back to the console. I'm going to go to the zoom. Oh. Wait for all of it to start. So this is the first output. This is the first of the two activities. It waits for 10 seconds. So the engine has time to start working. And then we send the message, which the return is null because we didn't actually return anything on that step. And then we have on the second call that this is the second of the two activities. So as you know, creating and starting managing the process engines is very quick. It's very easy to do once you get used to the notation. Of course, have all the documentation to fall back on if you don't remember anything. So I think that should be it for our examples today. Maybe you can go over to Q&A and answer any questions if we have it on the chat.
Yes.
It says
there is a question from the former topic. I think Rachel is asking, how do you how do you interact with multiple branches? How do you integrate changes from your branch to into another branch, into a main branch, for example? And yeah, well, although from Blazedpath you can launch branch merge. You can merge branches your branch into another one, the main branch. But there is no way with Blazedpath yet to compare how that change is going to impact before doing so. So you would need to rely into another Git more specific tool. So yeah, Jose there is showing that you can actually integrate your branch into the main branch, and it will automatically merge all those changes. But if you want to preview and actually see the impact before merging, we use an external tool yet. But for now, Blazedpath is focused on collaborating within the same branch So you can pull changes and from the branch that you're working in the Git repository, or you can push your own changes into the Git repository. So you can push your local changes into the one that's into the branch that's in the repository. So that's the main focus, how you can collaborate within a single branch. But really comparing changes within branches, you need a more dedicated Git tool yet. We'll see if that in the future. We'll see to add that in the future.
Yeah. I have a second question from Alice. Says, one quick question: can I make changes on Bbm process in runtime? And the answer to that is that all the changes have to be done in that time. Because
for now, so because business processes tend to be they tend to take a high penalty in performance. Typically process engines are very load sensitive. We have chosen to actually create the logic in dev time and in compilation time and to generate actual Node.js code, so we don't compromise performance. So it supports, if you properly design a business process, you can properly support high loads for business application. That's the main reason, because runtime engines have they take quite a toll on performance. So that's the main reason. And it's also very easy to come into the studio and make a change. Those processes usually control very sensitive operational business rules, and that's we see that it is most realistic to make those changes as part of a controlled flow of a new version of the application, of a new release of the application. So each time you make a change, that's a new release of the application, really. You need to run, build, and deploy. We'll see if in the future we'll add another type of engine that can be configured in runtime. That's for the future.
Perfect. Thank you, Gustavo. We went over 40 minutes, so let's just announce what we are going to do on the next webinars. We are going to use the new features we have in Blazedpath, like the new stencils for the screens with the catalogs and product information. We are going to be building over a couple of webinars a mini application for e-commerce with proper security and a couple of examples on how to build the application from scratch. So that's what probably our next seminars are going to be, webinars are going to be about. So stay tuned. Please subscribe to the channel.
A big thanks for our audience. Yeah, we want to thank the audience. Wrap up here, and hope to see you the next time. We'll be covering more topics, so stay tuned. And thank you again for watching this and following us and subscribing and commenting. All that help us. So again, we are seeing the community growing. That gives us encouragement to continue doing webinars, and that can help streamline the adoption of Blazedpath. So hope to see you next time.